Hello friends, it's Phil, and look, after 180 episodes on my podcast Growing All Gardening that you might have come across, I finally decided that I'm going to come in front of the screen and I'm going to talk to you directly about stuff. So, if you've never come across me before, I'm Phil, and if you've never come across my podcast or blogcast or video, it's called Growing All Gardening, and it's really a story. It's a story about growing a business. And most importantly, it's about growing a business in full view of everyone. Because that's really the world we live in. It's kind of like the Truman Show, kind of in my head, kind of. But look, today we're going to talk a little bit about moss. And the thing about it is this, my friends. The thing about it is 2022 into 2023 was a perfect year for growing moss. And if you're a fan of hanging baskets, then this year, my friends, is the year to fill your bags with moss. I think it's probably a different type of moss that goes in hanging baskets, but also keep in mind that if you're going to use the moss from your lawn for your hanging baskets, which maybe isn't recommended, but if you are going to do that, can I suggest you don't use a moss killer on it yet? But anyway, let's come back. This focus. This podcast strays a bit from time. Now, why was 2022 a perfect year for growing moss? Largely, I'd say it was a relatively dry summer season that extended on for quite a long time. It wasn't particularly hot, but one of the things that's difficult in a dry season, with a hosepipe ban I may add, is that actually getting nutrients into the grass is actually not that easy. So you may have been feeding your lawn or having your lawn fed, but that feed would have sat there dormant until some moisture came in. The other thing that I think we all might have done to keep busy and to keep things tidy, let's say, is that we would have all cut the lawns shorter and shorter and shorter throughout the season. So technically, as the grass started to dry up, started to dry out, maybe started to burn out a little bit, we couldn't get the nutrients in the ground, but we were cutting the lawn to kind of keep it tidy, because quite often, let's say, some grasses, even in the hottest summers, kind of pop up with little seed heads, let's say that. And it's nice to kind of keep things tidy and in order, but there is a tendency to cut the lawn shorter. So what we had was a dry-ish season, a hosepipe ban, struggling to get the feeds in the ground, and then cut the lawns too short, and then we went into autumn, which was damp, and then it's winter, which has been damp. It's been progressively damp, if a little bit rainy. Now the thing about that is the soil conditions on the back end of 2022 would have been quite compacted, let's say, wouldn't have been particularly loose with the agitation of growth, which would have led to compacted soils, packed down soils, short grass, lack of nutrients, all going into the wet winter period. Perfect for growing moss, my friends. Absolutely perfect. But look, some of that moss as well, from what I can see, has been really quite vigorous, and I'd call it fluffy moss. It's an affectionate term for moss that hasn't been around for very long, that can be quite easily dealt with. Now, here's the thing to think about. If you're finding that each and every year you have a moss problem, okay, then the chances are that problem is not going to go away, because it's always going to be there. And one of the things that I've seen over the years kind of escalate the moss kind of propagation kind of thing which is a byproduct of something else, is as we develop gardens or as we develop urban places, the hydrology, the water management around urban spaces is changing. And what that's doing is it's leading to more moisture coming off of roofs, coming off of hard standings, coming off of patios and driveways and whatever else, and going into less areas. So areas are holding more moisture, remaining damp for longer, and therefore perfect for growing moss. Again, moss, we're kind of growing basically moss growing beds. It's kind of like that. So consider this: you have a path and a patio and a driveway all put into your garden, lots of hard standing, lots of materials used for creating the sub base of all this stuff. Water can't go anywhere. We're creating very, 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 very shallow swimming pools, or the foundations of a swimming pool, except for the swimming pool is where the lawn is, if you get the drift. So you have to be sympathetic of the fact if you're creating all of these new projects, all of these new developments, and you're not considering the hydrology, where the water goes, the water is going to sit. No matter what you do, any sitting water creates retained dampness, which creates a perfect bed for growing moss, my friends. So, and as a footnote, aeration, holotine aeration, which is the best version of aeration in my book, or verti-cutting, slicing, is only going to be very, 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 very temporary in that sort of situ. So you've got to consider where the water is coming from, and where is it going to go, and have you got any drainage channels considered. Anyway, so if you've kind of thought about that a little bit, it's like, how are you going to fix the dampness problem on your lawn that may not be your fault? Keep in mind that neighbours and new developments around the area will change the hydrology of your garden. So be considerate about what's going on around you. So we're now on to, how do you manage moss most effectively if you have it as a reoccurring problem? The most important thing here is to make sure that you don't let it mature. Don't let the moss mature. And it's very, very easy for moss to mature and develop over a number of months into years. It's easy to stop it, particularly the fluffy moss. And it's easily dealt with an application of ferrous sulphate with nitrogen in it. The two work perfectly. It's used as a granular product, but what you can do is you dilute it and then you spray it or water it onto the lawn. The combination of the two is the important thing, and not many people will mention the nitrogen component. They'll mention the ferrous sulphate iron treatment that turns the grass green, let's say, and turns the moss black because it's killing it. But most importantly, you want that little bit of nitrogen to push through recovery, because what you don't really want is you don't want to damage the lawn and for it not to recover. Anyway, so once you've done your treatment of your ferrous sulphate, which is going to check, that's the word I use, it's going to check the growth, it's going to stop the growth. Keep in mind, if the moss is deep and fluffy, any application is only going to do the little top bit. It's only going to do the little top bit. And you've got to remember that there are layers of moss, particularly if it's matured. So you're going to have to probably do 1 or 2 or even 3 ways to do this. And I'll kind of try and explain that there's 1, 2 or 3 different types of ways to do this, in my opinion. And it's not the only opinion, so it's fine. Feel free to share your ideas. I've only just been on lawns for 31,750 hours. I was sharing that with my brother the other day because I kind of worked it out that it's quite a big number. 19 years of wandering around grass. Anyway, so we've done the ferrous sulphate application. Good. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go out and we're going to scarify out that first layer that has been activated on. Now, keep in mind that I think you can do this first scarification possibly in an either or option kind of way. What I mean by that is, if the moss is the fluffy kind of just this last few months kind of stuff, it's going to be very easy to lift out of the lawn. And if the grass is, keep in mind these words, actively growing is good, and the moss is actively growing, therefore the ground temperatures have to be up to 7 degrees, you're going to get a better response on this first scarification. So you can either scarify the lawn and lift out what's there as the first task, and you might find that the first task after a ferrous sulphate application is just enough, or you might find that what you want to do is do the scarification first, then a ferrous sulphate, an iron treatment, and then go back and do another scarification. You might want to do that. It all depends, in my experience, it all depends on how mature the moss is and how vigorous the moss is and what condition the grass is in. Because, as a footnote, if your grass is growing healthily, then it's going to be doing a better job than the moss, and it will kind of keep the moss out of the way. But keep in mind, 2022 was a perfect year for growing moss, because the lawn was, the grass would have been struggling, the soils would have been compacted, the feeds wouldn't have been in the ground very successfully. Therefore, the moss is ahead of the grass, if you get my drift. So, where are we? Right, so we've done, we've done the application and we've done the first scarification. And we've made some thinking around hydrology and drainage and damp soils. The other thing to consider with fixing this moss problem is shade in the garden. And whilst you can get grass to grow in shade, it's only going to be select types of blend that will grow successfully, and you have to get it growing really successfully before the canopies of the trees kind of swamp all of the growth. That can be a bit tricky, so you have to think very carefully about grass that's in shade, and is it really going to be possible to retain that grass, and do you need to change the type of grass to something that's more sympathetic with shady conditions, a ryegrass, as opposed to other types of grasses. The other thing, getting rid of moss and keeping rid of moss is really about a feeding regime, keeping the grass really, really healthy. And keep in mind that if you're cutting and maintaining a really fine lawn, the lawn is going to need to be fed regularly. And is a feed every 10 or 12 weeks by the application companies, let's say, enough? It might not be. It might be that you have to, from time to time, give the lawn a bit of a fast feed. So rather than the slow release products that, let's say, the lawn treatment companies typically use, is a bag of your own of a conventional fertilizer can be a bit of a godsend, because you will know that your lawn needs it before someone who comes and treats it might treat it. So that's a really good thing to keep in mind. Keep your lawn healthy, keep it fed, particularly if you want or you are maintaining a really fine lawn, because it's going to be stressed and it's going to be hunting nutrients. So I guess at this point, at the end of my first video moments in front of you, my friends, all I've really tried to share with you is that 2022 was actually a really good year for growing moss. The other thing that I think is really worth sharing with you and repeating again is the hydrology, the water management around your lawn and the lawn. You have to look at that really carefully, and I think you have to really, really look at the hard standing surfaces that you have in your garden, that you may be putting into your garden or your property, or the neighbours are, because that will have a dramatic impact on the water management, the dampness of your lawn, and therefore the prospect that your lawn can grow moss, given half a chance. After hydrology, regular feeding, regular applications of ferrous sulphate with nitrogen will keep everything at bay. Now, as the final gift to you, my friends, on this episode 181 of my podcast, the final message to say is that if you find this has been an informative podcast, video, however you're discovering it, could you basically subscribe to my channel? Because it will kind of encourage me a little bit. And if you don't subscribe, it's fine. It's not a game of numbers. The other thing is maybe you could hit like, because like is an indication that I know you're there. And if you want to drop a comment in somewhere, feel free to drop a comment in and encourage me or discourage me, however you feel fit. It's fine, however this goes. The most important thing with Growing All Gardening, the podcast, is it's a journey. It's a story. And I'm sharing it in full view of the world because that seems like a fun thing to do. Anyway, look, thanks for listening. I will catch you again. The podcasts, for reference, they come out every day, nearly, except for Saturday and Sunday. I do them Monday to Friday. And if you're more interested in what I'm doing with All Gardening, which has a big mission, by the way, the website is allgardening.co.uk. And you'll find me there. You'll find information there. You'll find stuff that will make you think, I hope. Anyway, look, thanks for listening this long. Hopefully some of that's been useful. And good luck with the moss. 2023. Moss, you're dead. Or at least managed. Anyway, take care. Ta-da. Bye. See ya. Ta-da.